Okay, again this week I'm going to break down chapter 5 and 6 into two different recordings. That way, if you need to go back and look at something, you're not trying to go back through all of it. Chapter 5 is a very interesting one. It has to do with values and ethics, which is what we're going to be talking about throughout this chapter and how that influences life choices we make, as well as how that plays into company values and company ethics. So let's take a look at our learning objectives for this chapter, which can be found on page 117. The objectives for this chapter: understand the nature of values and how they are learned, be able to classify and clarify values, understand the importance of business ethics, the difficulty of being ethical, particularly in a business arena, and the extent of ethical problems in business. All of those come into play. Identify workplace situations that often present ethical dilemmas, and identify workplace situations that often lead to problems and mistakes. So let's take a look at defining some of this, and you're going to find this on page 118 and 119 in your book. Again, what they'll do is pull out the word and definition into the side margin. So you'll find the definition for value, ethics, and morals all on page 118 in the left-hand side. And value is basically, it refers to something that a person attaches importance to, such as something you really value. I value my independence, I value money, I value family. Whatever it may be, and it's different for all of us, but it is something that basically you place a main importance on, and that is a value to you, okay? They're also tied to beliefs, that one mode of conduct is better than another sometimes, so you need to be aware of that as well. And they are actually closely tied to ethics. Ethics is the moral choices that a person makes. And many times a person's values influence what kind of behavior he or she believes is ethical. Okay, so keep that in mind. What you value can actually influence your action or your ethical behavior based on what you think is moral or not. Ethics convert values into action, which we just talked about, such as giving money to charity because it's something that you strongly believe in. Your personal ethics, you could give money to charity. You could donate time to a cause or something that you really believe in. Ethics usually are what we in our head determine when something is right or something is wrong. They actually influence what we consider our morals. And morals are an individual's, and this is important, individuals or a society's determination of what is right or wrong. There are some times that you might think something is not wrong, and yet society would deem that action as wrong. So keep that in mind as we go through this. People aren't really born with a particular set of values. You acquire them as you're growing up, and many of your values are already learned by the time you reach age 4. So they come from your home, they come from your environment, they come from your surrounding, and a bulk of them are formed at a very, very early age. Does that mean that you can't change your values or that nothing influences your values later in life? Absolutely not. Your core values are learned pretty early on, but those values and other values can be shaped by events that happen in your life, or by something traumatic that happens in your life. So there are things that can influence your values or shape the ones that you have, but understand that most of your core values, your key values, your sense of right and wrong, the things that, treating people fairly or unfairly, these things are what we call core values, and they're developed at a very, very early age. So obviously, depending on your upbringing and what type of an upbringing that you had will greatly influence the values that you end up with as you get older. How are values learned? Values, as we just discussed, people acquire values while growing up. You learn them by observing others. Culture can influence your values. Values can be learned through the communication of attitudes by others. And later in life, when you're a little bit older than 4, the media, technology, a lot of other things out there can definitely influence your values. But keep in mind that values can be learned by observing others. So if you grow up in a situation where you would go shopping with your parents all the time, and your mother or father would basically shoplift, your value is that this is acceptable behavior and that there's nothing wrong with it, okay? Because it's what you learned. So it's hard even later in life, if this is really how you were brought up. Most of us would say shoplifting is wrong, and obviously if you're caught, there's going to be a consequence for doing that. But if your environment that you grew up in, this is a normal thing that's done all the time, you would not necessarily know that this is wrong until one day you do it and you're caught, or, as you get older, somebody else kind of points out that, this is illegal and you shouldn't be doing this. You could be arrested. So keep in mind that a lot of things can influence culture. Cultures are very different, and what different cultures value, what we value here in the States, are not always the same things that are valued in other cultures, and what other cultures value may not always be the same things we value here. So a culture can also have a great influence on your values as well. Obviously, later in life, the media, is really great at influencing, sometimes in the wrong way, sometimes in the right way. It just depends on what they're showing or advertising. Again, a lot of this is discussed in more detail on page 119 in your book. And at the bottom of that, we start talking about the influence of company values. Values can sometimes be learned later in life when they are introduced to values that did not capture our attention earlier, okay? The teaching and demands of an employer will help us acquire new values. Most companies have a ethics policy and guideline that includes, quite honestly, what the corporate values and the corporate ethics are for that particular organization and company. It's something that normally, I know here at the college, we have to take ethics training yearly. We have to update our ethics training and go through it yearly. It used to be classroom driven, now it's online, but we still have to go through it every year. It's a requirement for having a position here, and also it's a requirement through our HR department. So you can learn new values based on what you learn through an employer. Sustainability and corporate spiritualism are examples of company values, and they tell you what that is if you're not familiar with it. Sustainability is about protecting the physical environment. It's become a very important value these days. I think in some cases, the media and the public pushed for that. So now you have more and more companies that actually make it a point to, let you know that, They really, one of their values is sustainability, and they really believe in protecting the environment. It wasn't always that way. I think as people became more aware of concern for the environment, many companies were kind of pushed in this direction. Corporate spiritualism is having as much concern for nurturing employees as for profit. You don't see a lot of companies that will actually use that word, corporate spiritualism, but there are more and more companies starting to realize that ROI, or the return on investment, is not the only thing that they need to worry about. If they want to keep their good employees and they don't constantly want to have high turnover, then they need to start looking at basically nurturing and taking care of these employees in terms of how they treat them, the benefits that are available to them, the training that's available to them, the promotion opportunities, etc. All of the different things that come into play. Kindness and compassion. Most people would probably think of kindness and compassion as individual rather than corporate values, yet many companies do promote this. Kindness and compassion as a corporate value. Now you're seeing more and more of that, especially since bullying in the workplace has become more of a big issue that's talked about. Don't get me wrong, bullying in the workplace has always been going on. It's just recently that it's finally been recognized, brought to the foreground, and is starting to have, people have classes on it now. Staff has to take classes on it. Managers are being taught how to actually deal with employees that are bullies in the workplace. It's a little different. It's not like someone just meeting you on the playground after school and beating you up. It's a little more subtle in the workplace, but equally as horrible to the person that's being bullied. So now you see things like kindness and compassion because we are looking at other issues that are creating problems within workplaces. Company values are passed along to employees as part of the process of socialization. And by socialization, we mean the process that employees start to understand the values, norms, and customs that are essential to adapting for any particular organization that they may be working in. As they begin to understand these things, they're socialized basically to the organization and the culture of that organization and what becomes normal for that particular organization. And every organization is a little bit different. So when you start in a new organization, you do have to kind of watch around and begin to understand what is basically the norm for that organization. Observing others provides hints about what is acceptable behavior, such as recognizing that kindness and compassion is important because you'll see it all around you when you're first starting at a company, if indeed that is one of their values. So how do we classify values? Okay, the classification and clarification of values is not real easy because we believe in a large number of things, and therefore there's a lot of values that exist. To classify values, you have to look at each one individually because they're closely tied to psychological needs. If you value something strongly, something such as accomplishing a worthwhile activity, or if you value independence or you value money, basically, this is what will drive you, if you value money, it's going to drive you based on your values and your ethics. So hopefully your ethics are good. It's going to drive you to work hard and look for those jobs where you can make the money that you need because that's something you value. Hopefully it doesn't drive you in the other end, I value money, so I go rob a bank. But again, depending on your value and ethical beliefs, you might see that as the way to do it. Most people wouldn't, but we actually break down value classification by categorizing 4 types of people. And again, this is in your book on page 120 and 121. The humanists, these folks are driven by a need for self-awareness, personal growth, and a sense of uniqueness. Strategists value sense of mastery and personal achievement. Pragmatics strive for niche anchored by power, influence, stability, and control. And adventurers, powerful drive for excitement, adventure, fulfillment. These are the risk takers, the thrill seekers in this particular case. So those are basically the 4 different ways we classified values by looking basically at the 4 different types of people. Are there generational differences in values? Well, of course there are. Just like there's generational differences in the workplace just because of the age, generation, and what influenced you during your generation. Generational differences in values and in the workplace is always a very interesting topic because we have multiple generations now in the workplace. So it's very hard in some cases for leaders to learn how to motivate and manage those different generations because they are motivated very differently. This does not mean it's a bad thing. In fact, if you are a leader and you have a very diverse group in terms of generational differences as well as other diversity issues and challenges, if you are able to pull that group together, you will have one of the most high-performing teams ever, just because those differences between them is what will make them be such high performers. Workers older than 50 in general may have different values than younger people. In most cases, you'll probably find out that they do. Generational values may persist for many years. Okay, a lot of times you don't change your generation viewpoint on things. Value clash is often between the baby boomers versus the Xers and the Ys or the millennials. Although I have some folks in class now, we have boomers, Generation X, and millennials in the class. And when we were talking about generational differences, you also have clashes between Generation X and Generation Y as well, not just between the boomers and Generation X and Y. Generation X and Y also have their issues. The latest generational values, connectivity, pluralism, value stereotypes are often exaggerations, and you have to watch out for these in the workplace. They're not healthy. So you need to be really careful that you don't stereotype yourself in terms of how you view other people. We were talking about this in class, and one of the millennials said, but those older people, they just don't understand technology. They don't get it. I don't want to have to explain it in steps. I don't want to have to. That's a general statement. Not all people that are older than 50 don't understand the technology. Yes, there are some people that are afraid of the technology, but there are some younger people that don't particularly like the various technologies either. But to make that assumption about an entire group is the wrong thing to do, because you could be missing out on a valuable relationship because you're ruling this person out just because you're stereotyping them. And that goes for more than generational differences. That goes for religious, race, sex, whatever the case may be. You need to really be careful of your stereotyping when you're in the workplace. If you turn to the next couple pages, 122 and 123, there's a great chart in your book that kind of talks about the stereotypes for the generations. It gives you, and depending on where you look, you see the dates of years a little different for the boomers and the X's and the Y's, but it's around those general categories. But it kind of gives you an idea of how different they are. If you just look at the first line, Boomers uses technology as a necessary tool, but not obsessed with technology for its own sake. Generation X, they're tech savvy. They enjoy making some use of personal mobile devices for work purposes. And then you go to the millennials, tech savvy, and they stay alert to new electronic devices that can be incorporated into work, often prefers to use personal rather than company electronic communication devices. Teamwork is very important to a Generation Y. They're highly team focused. X's, teamwork is important. Boomers, again, the generation, and when they work, they appreciate more of a hierarchy than a teamwork. That doesn't mean they don't work in teams. They'll tolerate them, but they really like to be, and they value working independently. So, it's important to understand the differences between the generations and how we sometimes stereotype them, particularly if you're going into any type of a supervisory or leadership role, because you're going to be managing this diversity. And you need to understand that you don't deal with everybody exactly the same. You're fair, but your approach in talking to or working with someone could be very different in terms of motivating them based on some of the diversity that you have in your group. Stereotypes of Generation Y that can be overcome. Some people feel like, and I'll give you an example, I can pick on myself, I'm a boomer, so the baby boomers think that Generation Y group, they just think they're entitled to everything. They don't necessarily need to work, they just want it handed to them. They don't have a great work ethic. Okay, they are just not like our generation. They tend to be very self-centered. They're too casual in their speak. They in their speech, they don't really. They don't use a polished form. They use all this text lingo, and that's how they write. Okay, those are stereotypes. Okay, if you really look at this and you look at the parentheses here in the slide. Where the stereotype is entitled, many cases, Generation Y folks offer to help others. Because remember, they're very much team players. They like to be on a team. Weak work ethic, ask about job expectations. If you talk to some of these folks, they have tremendous job expectations. There's not a weak work ethic. It's what we're seeing and how we're stereotyping. Now, are there some Ys that have a weak work ethic? Yes. There's some boomers that have one. There's some X's that have one. I mean, that's very individual. It's not by a generation. Self-centered, they love to be a team player. The Ys and the X's. They love being team players. They show organizational citizenship. They take initiative, but they do not really like being independent workers. They really work better as a team, and they're motivated more when they're as part of a team. Too casual in speech, such as like, and they use camcorders. They learn to speak in more refined and polished manner. Most of them, when you let them know that they need to be a little more professional in their speech, can certainly do so. It's not that they don't know it. It's just, and it's certainly something if they didn't, that they could learn. So stereotypes give us a general idea, but they're just that. They're a stereotype, and they're not always very healthy. So be aware of those, whether you're the Y looking at the boomers who are old and can't handle technology, and they don't like technology, and they don't understand us, and they're too slow, and they like to work independent, and we need somebody that can work with us as a team. There's all kinds of stereotypes out there depending on which way you're looking. So just be aware of it. You don't want to do it, and you certainly don't want to do it when you're a leader. Value clarification. Values develop early in life. They directly relate to the kind of person you are and the quality of relationships that you will form as your life goes on, which is really important. You need to recognize that fact because it does play into the types of relationships you form along the way and the types of people you tend to draw towards you. The importance of values has led to value clarification exercises, such as the one in your book, which is 5.1 on page 127. And actually, again, I highly encourage you to take these self-assessments. They're very enlightening sometimes if you are honest and answer them honestly with yourself. It's very enlightening to see where you fall in terms of ethical reasoning in this case, in terms of values and ethical reasoning and ethics. Okay, how ethical are you, basically? Similar to the video that I put out there for you to watch this week. So the importance of values has led to value clarification. You rank your values such as having an interesting job and career is more important than watching my favorite TV show, or being in good physical condition, or family's more important than my career, or health is more important than my favorite TV show, whatever. But you rank through them, and then you follow the little grid on page 127, and it tells you how to score it. It's always interesting to see, so I highly encourage that you do it. So what's the mesh between individual and job values then? Is there a mesh? Job performance is likely to be high when a fit exists between individual and job values. Okay? And I'll give you an example of this. I'm a real animal lover and I'm a real animal rights type of person. So I really care about the welfare of animals. If I went to work in a slaughterhouse where they are slaughtering cattle, this would not be the best fit because the values there differ dramatically from my personal values and how I believe, or my individual values. Doesn't mean I couldn't work there, but I'm probably not going to work there for long. I'm probably not going to be happy while I'm working there, and eventually I'm going to leave. And you're probably not going to get the most bang for your buck out of me when I'm there because I really don't want to be there. So the best fit is when you find an organization or you find a job where the values fit your own personal types of values. Okay? So that you don't have what is called person-role conflict. And that comes up when you have different values than the organization that you work with. There's a clash. And, you know, it's hard to deal with sometimes, and it does affect your performance in the workplace. So basically, the more you understand your own values and how important they are to you, the better you are at being able to look at an organization or a job or a position and see whether or not you are a good fit for that job or that position. Fit between personal and organizational values may change as a person's values change. So do things you value in life change as you grow up or you get older? Well, of course they do. There were things that I valued more in my 20s than I do now that I'm much older. When I was in my 20s and 30s, my career and where I was going with my career is something that I highly valued, and I worked on and I developed and I did all the things I needed to get into the positions I wanted and climb the corporate ladder. Now keep in mind, there were some times I sacrificed things to do that. Okay, because that was what my goal was, that is what I valued, that is where I wanted to be. As I've gotten older, some of the things that I thought were so very important in my 20s and 30s are not that important now. And my values and what I value as I'm getting older around me and at work and what I want even from a job have changed dramatically. So it is interesting because as you change, and you should, as you continue to grow and change as a person, you will find that some of your values may change along the way. Not necessarily your core values, but some of the other values you have picked up along the way. Although it is possible to change a core value, it takes a lot of work to do so, but you can do it if it's something that you desire to do. So basically, to find the fit between individual and organizational values, you have to define what is meaningful work to you. You have to understand what makes you happy, or you're going to end up somewhere working where you're not happy and find that the values of that organization and your personal values aren't a good fit. Okay? If you really value time with your family and you like that work-life balance, right, you're probably not going to work for an organization where they're putting in 80 or 90 hours a week. And unfortunately, that does happen. Okay? If you want to be home evenings because you want to be with your kids, or there are events that you want to do or see with your children, you're probably not going to want to work at an organization where you're having to either work an evening shift or you're having to change off shifts. All right? If the value and what you value is really spending that time with your family. Now, if what you value is, being an x-ray technician in the hospital, then you're going to have to understand that in doing that, part of what goes along with the job, some cases, is that they change shifts. And people have to work different shifts because the demand of the organization is that they be available and they be open 24 hours. So these are all things you have to kind of know and understand about yourself. Okay? And we're on page 124 and 125. In understanding this about you, then it helps you be able to understand other people. Okay? And this is in your book, Sales Manager. I have some junk bonds for you to sell that are much riskier than the investor would think, is what she's thinking, high-risk bonds. And he's thinking, I want to be a good sales rep, but it would be out of character for me to deceive investors. Okay? There's a major ethical value difference here between what these two are thinking. Okay, so it's really important that you kind of take a look at that and understand going in what your values are, and take a look at what the organization's values are. The importance of business ethics. Good ethics fit family and religious values. People are motivated by both self-interest and moral commitment. Okay, these are all kind of the reason that you want to kind of look at why is ethics important. Okay, it's important because in many cases we live by our values and our ethics, so it becomes very important. People are motivated by both self-interest and moral commitment. A good reputation can enhance business, including attracting good job candidates. I mean, how many of you want to work for companies that you heard were cooking the books? I don't see anybody lining up, and half of those companies are no longer in existence. So, you want to work for a company that you feel is ethical, that you feel has values, that will treat you, like, the golden rule, treat everybody like you would like to be treated. Many unethical acts are also illegal. That could lead to fines and imprisonment in a business environment. Okay? So you need to keep that in mind. There are sometimes acts that are unethical, and we'll talk about this, but they're not illegal. But you still have to use your ethical kind of guidance counter here just to see whether or not you should be doing this, because just because it's not illegal doesn't mean it's not unethical. High ethics can enhance the quality of work life. These are all good things to have in a business, and why you want business ethics. Okay, and again, I'm on page 125, but I'm getting ready to turn the page. A subtle reason for behaving ethically is that high ethics increases the quality of work life. Ethics provides a set of guidelines for what is acceptable behavior, particularly in a workplace. Several sample clauses from ethical codes are listed in your book on 125. Demonstrate courtesy, respect, honesty, fairness. Do not use abusive language. Do not bring firearms, knives, or illegal drugs to work. Do not offer bribes. Maintain confidentiality of records. Do not harass sexually, racially, ethically, or physically subordinates, superiors, co-workers, customers, or suppliers. These are all the types of things that would fall into an ethical code in an organization. And if you look on page 126, there's our company code of ethics, which is kind of a nice, easy one to read. Ours here at the college is a lot wordier than this. This is kind of a nice bulleted thing to take a look at, but it gives you an idea of kind of a corporate code of ethics. So why isn't being ethical easy? One would think it would be easy, and you know what's right and wrong, you know what's being ethical and what's not being ethical, but it's not always black and white. That's the problem. Sometimes there are shades of gray, and it can be very complex to make a decision and hope that you're making the right ethical decision. Ethical decisions are often complex. People have different levels of moral development, from wanting to escape punishment to being guided by principles of justice and right. Moral disengaged people feel no distress when behaving unethically. So when you are morally disengaged, there's not really an issue with doing something that maybe you or I might feel is unethical, because you don't have that same thought process that you and I would have. You're morally disengaged, so you don't worry about it. Okay? In your book on page 126, they talk about at the last paragraph, closely related to a moral development is that some people have a tendency to morally disengage or think in such a way as to avoid being moral without feeling distress. The rest of us, if we did something, would feel distressed or feel like we did something wrong. These are people that have the tendency to just really disengage that, okay? And when they do that, then it doesn't bother them to sell a trade secret or to steal office supplies from the company and sell them out on eBay for their own personal gain. They don't really have any guilt. They don't distress over that. They have really just disengaged, and they do what they need to do. Okay? I'm not saying that it's right, because obviously it is not, and if you are caught, you're going to be, probably if it's stealing, you're probably going to be fired. But morally disengaged people really just, they're not like the bulk of the world. There's no distress when they behave unethically. The rest of us think about it for years sometimes if we make the wrong decision. So just keep that in mind. They give you an example. A product development specialist might morally disengage from selling trade secrets to a competitor. They rationalize is how they do it, by rationalizing that he or she is underpaid and therefore deserves supplementary income from working so hard. Okay, and then that makes it okay. And we all know some people like this, that they rationalize for their actions and what they do. Workers with a strong tendency to morally disengage have been shown to engage in such behaviors as committing fraud, self-reported lying, cheating, and stealing. Okay? Another major contributor to unethical behavior is greed and gluttony, which can lead to pursuing self-gain, which can lead people to make the wrong decisions and to behave in an unethical manner. Also, you can sometimes see motivated blindness leads people to see what they want to see, blocking out contradictory data, okay, which can also cause some problems with why things aren't always as easy as they seem ethically. Another major reason for unethical behavior in business is that goals sometimes reward unethical behavior. This is in your book on 128. And that's kind of scary, such as sales representatives are being rewarded for sales with less attention to how the sale is accomplished. And that happens a lot in the sales world. You usually have a quota that you're given of revenue that you have to bring in. And some companies, it's not about quality and it's not about really taking care of the customer. It's really about getting the revenue. They don't really care how you do it. They don't care what promises you make. Just get the people to sign on the dotted line so we can get the revenue in. Well, that is unethical. And we're actually rewarding that behavior, because if that person behaves unethically to get those contracts signed, not only do they reach the revenue goal, but they get a bonus. So, it's kind of shades of gray on some of these, and it's not always easy to do the right and ethical thing for someone working there, because in some cases businesses promote this. Okay, motivated blindness, people tend to see what they want to see, and they block out other things when it's in their best interest to remain uninformed. Okay, so the extent of ethical problems. A survey conducted by the Ethics Resource Center shows that 41%, this is a pretty high number, of workers observed misconduct on the job, including lying, stealing, and sexual harassment. Okay? They observed it. Okay? It doesn't mean they reported it. Company bankruptcies are acceptable but harm many people, such as unpaid bills and pensions. Think of some of these big companies that have gone bankrupt, okay, because of the decisions they made. People were hurt by some of these things. People at the top, in some cases, got out of some of these things, but because of the decisions that were made and weren't necessarily the most ethical decisions, people were harmed. Many people were harmed. So, it's really an interesting thing when you start looking at ethics from all different sides. They have a good example on page 128, Avon Products Incorporated. We all know Avon. They used to be the person that knocked at your door selling Avon. Now they have websites and do it in other ways, but they was investigated for 5 years as to whether the company violated the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act by providing gifts or making payments to government officials in China and other countries in order to obtain licenses to sell its products. Okay, prosecutors and regulators were seeking approximately $50 million to settle the claim. Now, that may not have been their intention, or it may have been their intention. It's hard to say. When I worked for EDS years ago, many, many years ago, we would be able to go out with our vendors, and we could take them out to dinner and put it on an expense card, and different things like that. As ethics and values and things started coming to the foreground, and there were times that a vendor might drop by, like at Christmas they'd stop by and drop off a big basket of goodies for the team or the department and something like that, or some vendors would come by and drop off tickets to football games, baseball games. I mean, you had a partnership. You were working back and forth with these people. Well, that soon stopped because it was considered that it was not ethical to do that, because these are vendors you work with. So it could be perceived, even though this may not have been the case, but it could be perceived that you're favoring one vendor over another vendor because you're taking these gifts and you're using these gifts. So nowadays you will find in many companies you're not allowed to accept. It's actually written into the ethics guidelines, and you're not allowed to accept gifts from, vendors that you work with, or, partner companies that you have to partner to on projects, because they don't even want the perception that there may be something unethical going on. So you need to be really careful of your actions. They point out in here, consumers also are fraudulent, such as making false insurance claims, making a purchase with the intent to return it after one use. We see that all the time. You even see it in the TV shows. Someone wants to go to some expensive thing, they buy the dress, and they tuck the price tag in, they wear it one time, and then they go back and return it to the store and get their money back, saying they didn't like it or it didn't fit. Insurance is a big industry where people are always, making fraudulent claims. Now, is everybody horrible? Again, no. But the fact is, things happen, and there are unethical decisions that are made out there in the world, even in the corporate world, and you may be faced with or asked at some point in time to do something that really goes against your grain or what your little moral compass is telling you to do, and at that point in time you're going to have to make a decision. Okay, and it happens to everybody, and it really depends on how strong your values and your ethics are as to how you're going to decide or what you're going to do when you're faced with that particular decision. Frequent ethical mistakes and violations. Illegally copying software, and this is a rampant problem. People do it a lot. They copy it, they bring it home, they add it on their machines because they want to be able to do it. It is not ethical to do that, especially if it is software that was bought by your company, licensed through your company. But if you look in your book, according to Apple, the annual loss to piracy, which is what this is called, is more than 11 billion annually. Okay? And it is illegal. That's a high dollar issue for, an ethical decision. Treating people unfairly, equal amounts of work should receive equal awards. Basically, if you have any kind of things going on in the workplace where you're discriminating on demographic factors such as sex, race, or age, this is also unethical, and also, in some cases, illegal, depending on what you're doing. It just depends. It's certainly unethical. It depends on what the case may be, but it could be illegal as well. Sexual harassment certainly is illegal, and should, ethically is not the best thing to do either in the workplace. Keep in mind, little things can be, again, you really need to be careful about how you act and what you do in the workplace, because things can be perceived differently than you intend that to go. We had a guy in the group once that everybody knew. He's very friendly. This is a group of people who've been working together for 10 years, doing business together 10 years. He walked up behind one of the girls one day. He was talking to her, and he just said, "You look stressed out." And she said, "I am." And he started massaging her shoulders, not with the intent to sexually harass her. He was married happily. He thought he was doing a nice thing, but she was not comfortable with this. Now, fortunately, she could have just gone to HR, and they probably would have brought him in and talked to him. Fortunately, because they had been working together for 10 years, she just turned around and said, "Hey, look, you are in my space, and I am not comfortable with this. I know we've worked together, but this is not something that I want to happen, and I'm not going to allow it, and I'm just telling you up front, don't do this again. And again, his intent was never to do any kind of harassment, but that very well could be interpreted as some type of sexual harassment. So you need to really be careful. Conflict of interest, okay, and again, all of these are on page 129. A conflict of interest occurs when your judgment or objectivity is compromised. Often this takes place in the sales end of things. Okay, if a company accepts a large gift from a sales representative, it may be difficult to make objective judgments about the representative. If you work for the government and you go out to 4 different companies for RFPs, requests for proposals, but you've worked with this one company before and you're kind of buddying up with them, then basically it could be perceived that, you're accepting gifts, they're bribing you. It could be perceived as that. And in some cases, there are companies that try to do that. So just be careful. Divulging confidential information could be okay if the welfare of others is threatened and you know something that's going to save lives, but it is unethical. It would be like going to talk to human resources and telling them some very personal things, and then they send out, a broadcast letter to the entire organization, really recapping and keeping everybody up to date on all the stuff that's happening with you. If someone says something's confidential, you need to keep it confidential, unless, like I said, there's the welfare of people at stake, or there's someone being threatened, then that turns the scenario into a total different scenario. Another frequent ethical mistake would be misrepresentation of employment history, where you lie, basically, on your employment history or your application. I've known people that have lied on their resumes. In many cases, I know one person that actually got hired, and then when they found out after the fact that this person did not have the credentialing that they said they did, the person was fired. They lost their job. Not only because they didn't have the credentialing, but because they basically were unethical and they lied in order to get the job. Ethical violations with computers and information technology, including hacking as well. But they give you some good examples, and obviously, you're not going to be on a company asset, ordering from eBay or running a business, because that is unethical. But also things like, I like one of the issues that they brought up, is another issue is the fairness of having an employee work at a keyboard for 60 hours in 1 week when such behavior frequently leads to repetitive motion disorder. So if you know that something is going to cause a health issue for an employee, are you being ethical when you demand or you tell them that this is their job and this is what they have to do? So it kind of goes both ways there, whether an employee is doing something unethical or whether the employer. Causing problems in order to take credit for them. This is like the person that quietly, without anybody knowing about it, creates an issue. Then they rush in to save the day. They come up with the solution, they implement the solution, and then they take credit for solving it. Is that ethical? They lied about there being a problem to begin with, or created the problem, and then they rush in and they take the credit for doing it. It's really not, in my opinion, but the book tells you that an average person tells 1 to 2 lies a day, according to studies, and frequently at work. The average person, not the unethical person, but the average person tells those little white lies every day. So it's kind of interesting when you read some of the statistics in the book. Lying in order to look good is frequently done. Okay, and they just, outright lying, not being truthful. We've heard about this, throwing somebody else under the bus. Sometimes it's done out of fear. Who did this? And the person says, I didn't, so-and-so did, because they're afraid. Other times, as in the manager that gets kudos for a project that maybe he or her team put together and takes credit for doing it versus giving the people that really worked the project the credit for doing it. So again, that is unethical. Engaging in unethical behavior to benefit the company, such as cooking the books, which I had mentioned earlier. And we sure know that there's a lot of companies that have done that. They make the numbers look better for the financial analysts and for the stock values, or they withhold information about something until a certain date and then it comes out. Just little things. And the book mentions something as little as neglecting to give a customer the correct change when the amount is small. And you know it. You knowingly you do it. 2 studies found that workers were more likely to engage in unethical behavior when they identify with their employer and at the same time expect they will be rewarded for such behavior. An example would be receiving a favorable performance evaluation for benefiting the company with unethical behavior. So it's kind of a circular catch-22, but there are, unfortunately, a lot of things that go on in organizations that do fall in that line of, is this ethical, is this unethical? Guidelines for making those decisions and behaving ethically. Okay, and this starts on page 131 in your book. Developing the right character traits, which would include trustworthiness, respect, responsibility, fairness, caring, and citizenship, especially organizational citizenship. And basically a character trait, again, is defined in your book, an enduring characteristic of a person that is related to consistent moral and ethical behavior. Using a guide to ethical decision making. And these are things that you're going to want to ask yourself if you're faced with a particular situation. Basically, ethical screening, okay, refers to running a decision or an action kind of through an ethics test, even if it's your own ethics test in your head. So an ethical screening is defined on page 132. But if you're not sure about a decision that you're going to make, and you think you know what you want to do, take that decision and then run it through this little ethical decision-making test. How morally correct was my decision, or is my decision if I go this route? Was justice served by my decision? Okay? Or am I just serving myself or serving someone else, or did somebody get hurt because of the decision that I made? Okay, if my decision, and this is a big one, is that, if this decision were made public, can I live with it? That's a good one. If you ask yourself that and you don't want anybody to know about the decision that you made, then it's probably not the right ethical decision to make. And would you tell a family member to do the same thing or make that decision? But to me, the biggest indicator is, would you want your decision to go public? Would it be okay for everybody to know about the decision you made? And if you say no, chances are there's probably a better route than the route you're taking in terms of making that decision. And it's a good guide to run through whenever you're not sure. You can run it through your head in a few minutes. If you're trying to make a decision or you're looking at different options, if you can look at all of these and feel good about the decision that you're looking at implemented, then it's probably ethical, and it shouldn't be an issue. Developing strong relationship with work associates, building strong relationships with people is likely to enhance ethical behavior. Okay, ethical skill building consequences of information about personal relationship is that building stronger relationships with people is likely to enhance ethical behavior, which would make sense, because as you have stronger relationships with work associates, you care about those people. You're going to start looking out for the welfare of all when you have to make some type of a decision. If you're not sure, use the corporate ethics programs that are available through the organization and take a look at those ethics or run through them to see if that can help you with making the decision that you need to make. Follow an ethical role model in the company. We all know those managers or leaders that we really like, that we think are trustworthy, are ethical, that seem to do the right thing at the right time. Many cases, these are managers or executives, but it could be even somebody in your group. It could be a peer. Follow an applicable code of professional conduct that kind of, exists for any group. The book talks about ethics hotlines that are established, programs where you could call in and, be able to, if you're faced with an ethical dilemma, talk to someone, a counselor, to see what might be the right choice in making that decision. The problem is sometimes you have to make decisions quickly, and it's not something you're given the luxury or the time to research, in which case then your best thing is to do an ethical screening and go through some of those questions and ask yourself what your answers are to those questions. Ethics training programs. This is why most companies put people through ethics training programs, with the hope that when they are faced with a dilemma situation, that they can rely on that training and hopefully make the ethical decision that needs to be made. It also, depending on what type of ethics program you have in place, that also promotes a corporate culture. And once you are familiar with your culture, a lot of times that makes it easier to know what decision or which way to go on a decision for ethics. Blowing the whistle on highly unethical and illegal conduct. The whistleblower is usually an employee who reports wrongdoing in the organization to parties who can take action. Okay? Whistleblower reports wrongdoings. Whistleblower is often retaliated against, despite the fact, that the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, this is on page 135, is supposed to prevent retaliation against whistleblowers from top management. Okay, it is a law, and it is illegal to retaliate if it can be proved. The problem is a lot of times it can't be proved, especially if a whistleblower is whistleblowing, say maybe on a manager or a leader that's doing something wrong. What happens is they make that person's life just unbearable, so that they end up leaving the company. But technically, they should not be retaliated against. Now, I'm not saying every company does that. We're just saying statistically, unfortunately, oftentimes a whistleblower is retaliated against. If you are going to be the whistleblower on a situation, make sure that you have your facts documented and have been documenting them for a while, so that you have all your ducks in an order, because that's going to be needed when you talk to HR or when they start to do the investigation. U.S. government sometimes gives big payoffs to whistleblowers when it's whistleblowers against banks. And they talk about at the end of this chapter, in an extreme example in 2014, 4 whistleblowers received approximately $170 million for aiding investigators in obtaining a record judgment of $16.65 billion from the Bank of America Corporation. The fraud involved selling investments based on inflated evaluations of mortgages by Countrywide Financial Corp., a company that the Bank of America acquired in 2008. So in this case, these whistleblowers who helped provide documentation, I'm sure, and the facts to the investigators, were actually rewarded for blowing the whistle on this unethical behavior. So the hardest thing is that when many people see something being done unethically, they're afraid to report it for fear of retaliation, and therefore, whatever is happening continues to go on and could possibly even get worse. That is pretty much this chapter, chapter 5. Again, if you look on page 136, the summary and review are very good. They kind of hit all the high points of this particular chapter on values and ethics. One of the important things to take away is that you need to understand your own values, what's important to you, and how those values guide your ethical decisions or actions. And you need to really understand that before you start, understanding others and looking at organizations that you may want to reside in for any length of time in terms of work, especially if you're looking at something where maybe your values do not, play out together, where you're looking at more of a conflict between the values there, that person-role conflict. It's definitely stuff to think about because it definitely affects the actions we take, and not only in the workplace, in our personal life as well. So keep that in mind. I will be recording, as I said, the Chapter 6, Problem Solving and Creativity PowerPoint separately, so that you will be able to review those as a separate entity, just in case you want to go back and look at them. We talked about ethics hotlines and ethical training programs. If we have the right culture, we mentioned that, I mentioned it earlier. If there is a right corporate culture, a lot of times the corporate culture will promote an ethical type of environment and behavior within the company. So it's pretty important, especially when you are looking at culture in a company, that you really get a good idea of what the values and the ethics are for the organization that you're going to work for or work in, and understanding what yours are so that you can take a look at the comparison between the two. I will be back with Chapter 6.